what you're seeing here on your screen is our Process Cloud Service Composer. We have a particular space that we call product management with a handful of applications. The one I wanted to show you today was expense approval. I have a version 1 actually. And this expense approval application happens to have one particular approval process that right now it's very manual intensive. We're going to be coming in. There's going to be an approval that, as we don't have any decision, we're always making flow directly to this original controller. And then this individual will need to determine if the expense as a whole is approved or not. And then we're going to be sending some automated email notifications to notify the submitter whether this individual is going to be reimbursed for those particular expense charges. So I'm going to go very quickly and move into the workspace to illustrate the particular approval process where all the time we're just going through a manual individual. I already preloaded this form with a particular trip that I'm going to be making in Oracle Open World this year. I'm kind of fast forwarding this, but then I'm going to be specifying my trip start date, which is October the 1st. And then I'm an employee for North America. All this is leveraging the PCS new web forms, which are adaptive response, and you can use in different form factors. And then the meat of this particular expense report is to specify the expense date. So let's say I'm going to be charging for a particular line item that I already I'm pre-populating into my form. Let's say lunch. I'm spending $35. And then I'm going to be adding on the same day a dinner expense that will go for $45. Okay. So I'm going to be submitting this particular expense report. And then to illustrate the particular process structure we have in place right now, I'm going to see the need for approving this expense for a trip to Oracle Open World. And then the controller, which I'm logged in with, is going to be able to inspect each one of these line items, and we'll need to manually determine whether this expense as a whole can be approved. So we're going to say as a controller that all line items are in compliance. We are approving. It's not necessary to enter comments, but as we make this very manually intensive, then it's always good that the controller specifies he's okay on this particular expense. So once we enter the comments, we're going to be approving, and off you go. Okay. So this particular expense will be moved on into the process, and we're going to be seeing some email notifications coming through. So if I click on my tracking to look for recently completed instances, we're going to see 8:35 a.m. in my Pacific Standard Time time zone. And then once we click there, we're going to be able to see this particular path moving through my process. So it went through the controller for manual approval, and then I'm sending the approval notification to the submitter. All right. So let's make this process a little bit more optimal, right? So we actually want to add a decision to analyze automatically the compliance of these different line items. And then we're going to be adding this as part of our process to only route these approvals to the regional controller when things are probably out of the compliance that we define as an organization. So what I'll do is I'm going to be coming to PCS, the PCS main space. And one of the things that you're going to notice is that we have some applications that have these green icons. There are process applications, but then we also have other types of applications that are depicted with this yellow grid icon. That is nothing more than a DMN compliant decision service application. Okay, so I already pre-seeded one to speed up the demo and don't have to create all the data types, but there's going to be one particular DMN application we're going to call Expense Compliance Validator. Okay, and the only thing I've done on this particular decision model I'm creating is the ability to define my data types, where in this case we have an expense report that is nothing more than a collection of expense items And then the expense item, the part that we're interested in analyzing in this decision service is the item code and the amount that was imputed against this code within this particular report. We have built, for those that are coming new into the DMN service, a particular set of videos and kind of a quick recipe for implementing a decision model itself that will typically get exposed as adding the top-down decomposition of your decisions within the model, adding some input parameters, defining the logic itself on each one of the decisions you added, test your decisions, and then deploy to create the service. Okay, I'm going to be just closing this in a particular friendly wizard, and I'm going to be doing this 1 and 2 in a separate fashion because I already know what I'm creating. So I'm going to be defining an input data that will be an expense report, and I'm going to be selecting one of my existing data types that I already selected in this case. So I'm going to be creating this expense report, and off you go. My input data is now defined. The way I want to create my top-down decomposition for my decision model is using two different decisions. One is to evaluate the expense compliance as a whole, and then I'm going to be creating a second decision that will be evaluating the compliance for each one of the expense items, right? So in the first decision, we're going to be looping through the different items in the expense, and then the second one will be analyzing the specific compliance of each expense line item. So we're going to be calling this expense compliance. We can add some description here, expense compliance validation decision. We can ask a question, is this expense compliant with the organization rules? We can say this can be true or false, and then we can leave the output unselected. As we create the implementation, the output is going to be automatically inferred. So once we define the high-level description of my initial decision, then I can select which one of these different implementation types that I mentioned before I want to select. In this case, I'm going to be using a field expression to kind of show a little bit of what is some of the expressiveness of the field expression that we're bringing into the tool. And so far, we're not concentrating on the implementation, but the next decision I want to check is the expense item validation. Expense item validation decision. We can say, is this expense line item compliant with the organization rules? And we can say true, false, and we're going to let this infer. And actually, what we want to do in this case is create a function to determine the compliance of this particular expense and line item. We could map this with other things, but I just want to show the function and how we can change the function implementation to multiple types within the tool itself. So very much, we're going to be getting a report with a collection or array of codes and amounts. We're going to be funneling it through the expense compliance that will be looping through that array, and then each one of those elements in the array will be delegated to this expense validation function. So for just a second, we're going to be coming into this particular item validation, and what I'll do is I'm going to be changing the implementation going to be changing the implementation to a decision table, okay? Because I want to analyze each one of the line items with the decision table. And then I want this function to receive two parameters: the code of the expense item, okay? And then we're going to be adding an amount, okay? And I can select a particular type, which is going to be a particular number. And this is important because from this top-down expression, we're going to be calling this function with these two input parameters to be analyzed within my decision table. So the first thing I'll do is I'm going to be analyzing the code. And in this case, I'm going to be looking for the code. And you're going to see as we implement this decision model, and decision within the decision model, IntelliSense popping up pretty much everywhere. And then what I need to do is I need to start defining some line items. In this case, it's going to be a lunch, and this is going to be compliance as long as the amount is lower than, let's say, 25. Okay, so that's what the organization is allowing from a compliance perspective. We're going to be adding a second line, which is going to be dinner. And then in this case, we're going to be a little bit more generous, and we're going to be saying that amount less than 50. Okay. And then we also want to be able to say for anything that is not recognized as lunch or dinner, in this case, this dash, then we're going to be saying that it's not approved because it's something that we haven't already categorized within our implementation. Let me remove this because it's not a function. So you can see as we are coding these different entries into the decision table, we're going to see real-time recommendations and warnings or errors that you're creating as you're modeling this decision model itself. Okay, so I think we are good as a starting point to with our expense item validation, where if we get an expense line item for lunch less than 25, then we're okay. We don't need the intervention of the controller. And if the dinner costs less than $50, then we're going to be in compliance as well. But if somebody reports an expense report with anything other than these two items, then that will be automatically defaulting to false. Okay, but there's a particular warning we're getting from this expression, which is that based on the analysis of this decision table, we're seeing that there are some conflicting rules. In this case, rule number 1 with 3 and rule number 2 with 3. Okay, but fortunately, we have what we call different hit policies for decision tables. So you can click on this one. We're going to have multiple ones that are implemented, but the one we want is the first hit policy. So it's going to be analyzing the input parameters in the decision table top down, and that will remove the ambiguity that the DMN service is reporting. Okay, so you're going to see that the warnings disappear, and now we have a fully functional function that is helping me analyze the compliance of different line items. The second thing we want to do is to create a field-based expression that will be looping through the line items in my expense report and calling this function to determine the compliance. If we loop through all of those items and everything is true, then everything's going to be in compliance. But if something that is being flagged as false, then that aggregation of Boolean expressions will be returning a negative value, and that's when we're going to need the controller and intervention. So I'm going to be starting to type in a particular field expression that for every item, which is nothing more than a variable in my report.items, okay, which is my input data, we're going to try to make sure that it satisfies the expense item validation, which is my already created decision service. So as I'm typing through this field expression, I'm getting IntelliSense recommendations as to what are the things that will help me create these valid and compliant field expressions. So as this expense item validation is a function, then it will be expecting two input parameters, the code and the amount. And for this, we're going to be adding item dot code for my first one, and item dot amount for the second one. So as we move out of this particular decision, then we're going to see that we don't get any warnings or errors. So I think we are ready to go. Okay, so we have implemented the decision that loops through the different expense items, so we can very easily manage collections. And then we delegate to the individual decision table to analyze the compliance of that particular line item. The last thing in the chain of this implementation is to create a decision service, which is how this DMN service is going to be consumed from client applications. So in this case, I'm going to be creating a particular decision service called is compliant. Okay, that's going to be the name. And you're going to notice that automatically it's offering me the input and output and arguments for my decision. So in this case, I want my input and argument to be this report information. So I'm going to be dragging and dropping. So I didn't drag there good enough. So now you're going to see that the report is coming in. And then I need to select from these different decisions within my model, which is the one that I use as the response. So as I want my whole expense report to be analyzed, I'm going to be dragging this and I'm going to be dropping this out. And very much the result of this field expression is what's going to be returned as a value when this is compliant and our endpoint is called from the client application. In this case, it's going to be my process. So we have this decision model fully created, input parameters. We created a top-down decomposition of my main decisions in my model. We implemented each one of these decisions, and then we created an interface so that this DMN model can be called from a client application. So the last thing we need to do is do some quick validation. Okay, so we're going to be adding some expense line items to do some quick checking. Let's say a lunch for $20, and then as we start this, we're going to see that this is compliant. Let's say we go a little bit over the approved threshold, which is 25, and we're going to be getting that this is false. And we could also add like multiple elements. Let's say dinner, and this is going to be, remember the threshold was 50, and let's say this is 20. In this case, it's going to be analyzing the two elements, and we should be getting a true as a result because both elements are in compliance. But if we exceed the amount for one of this, then we're going to see that it is false, right? So if you had multiple services implemented, we would be getting the result for each one of those different intermediate values. So this is how you go about doing a quick test of your decision model and validating that it's working as expected. We are trying to work on a test suite to create an automated test harness moving down the line as we had in OVR. But this debugger is very helpful in terms of providing that first level of detail. So from here, you can create snapshots to create our full history of versions, and then you can deploy from there. Okay. So now that we have this particular decision service implemented, I already have the same decision service I created already deployed with version 0. So I'm going to be coming to my PCS process application. And the very first thing that I'll do is I'm going to be coming into my approval process. And what I'll do is I'm going to be bringing in my decision activity. So in this case, we're going to be validating or validate expense compliance. Okay. And as we go to the properties, we're going to be providing an implementation. So far in this drop down, there's nothing. But let's go and discover the available DMN decision services that have been created and deployed with DMN. So in my case, I'm interested in this version 0 of my expense compliance validator with version 1.0. Okay, so we're going to be using this particular version, and then what will happen under the coverage is that we're going to be interacting with the DMN decision microservice runtime, getting the description of this decision service, and then we're going to be able to bind this decision activity to the specific model. And then if you had multiple services, select the one you want. In this case, there's only one, so we're good there. The next thing we want to do is to provide the input and input parameters to feed the decision model, and also get the result from this decision service. And this is done via data associations. This is nothing different than what you've been exercising by calling services. But in this case, we have this particular decision model that is expecting an array of items. And then on this side, we have a data object that is the expense report, which also has items. Okay. But the problem here is that the types of the arrays on each side is different. This can be easily resolved with transformations into my data association set of capabilities in PCS. I already have one created, which pretty much is doing a one-to-one mapping between the code structure in this expense item in PCS to this amount, the code on the input parameters, and it's very easy to do the necessary adjustments to map this input to the target expected by the DMN service. In this case, there was only difference of like a numeric precision, where in this case it was a double. In this case, it's a simple numeric without a double precision. So by casting, everything's done as expected. So let's use that transformation, and there you go. So we're mapping the input parameters from the expense we are running my process and into what is expected by the decision service. The last thing to do is to get the interpretation or the result of my DMN decision service, and I'm going to be binding these to a specific Boolean expression to determine if a manual approval is needed. Okay, and that will determine whether we're going to be routing the control of the process to the regional controller or not. So that's as much as you need to do as a consumer from the decision service in PCS. So we are ready to go and give this a shot. So we're going to be publishing this, and we're running into the last mile of this demo. So add a decision. So we're going to be publishing this change. There's been a couple of new changes that are bringing this decision, and then I'm going to be deploying this new version of the process that is going to be using this decision service. Okay, so I'm going to be deploying the last snapshot that I created. No sub-services. We're going to skip this. We are passing the validation successfully, and what I want to do is I want to override the existing version. So I'm going to be selecting the override and force default set of options. I'm deploying, and then this should finish successfully. And we're going to have a new revision that we can add to start using more intelligent decisioning into our process. So we're going to be finishing this. So now the process is ready to be used. I'm going to go back to my workspace. I'm going to be submitting a new expense report. And in this case, I'm going to be adding perfectly valid expense. So we're going to say 20, and we're going to be providing a dinner of 45. So these two are going to be, or actually, let's say dinner 45. But I'm going to be adding a particular hotel line item, which is something that we don't have yet on our DMN decision service. So all these two are going to be compliant, but this hotel, even though I got something for $45, it's still going to be flagged as not recognized, and it's going to be routed to my controller. So I'm going to be hitting submit. So this will go through my process. The first step, as we seen before, is going to be my decision activity, and we're still going to be seeing this trip to Oracle Open World showing up 5 seconds ago. So we're going to see that, and we have the hotel for 45 and that, and the controller will need to approve this. For the sake of time, I'm going to be approving this directly. I'm going to be coming to my tracking. I'm going to look for completed instances. And when I check this successfully finished an instance, then I'm going to see that that you went through my new decision activity, but it didn't pass compliance, and then we needed to come in and make this manual approval. But let's say that we want to start automating this hotel expense line item. So I can very quickly come through, come to my expense validator rule, and I'm going to be adding into my line item validation a new line item that is going to be hotel. Okay. And whatever is, below, let's say 100, then, it's going to be automatically, approved. So we're going to be saving this change. I'm not going to be debugging it, so we can go quicker. We're going to be creating a snapshot that is going to be called V8 or V9. I already had some of this. It's going to be 1.0. I'm going to be overriding. I'm going to see that I'm adding a hotel validation rule. So I'm going to be deploying this new version, and there you go. It's readily available for consumption. If I come to my snapshots, I'm going to be able to see that this V9 that I created with my particular node is my current active version 1.0. And if you wanted to consume this, you can view this and get specific the URL for invoking this decision service. But without any further changes, I can come and try to submit the same expense report. And this time we're going to see that it's going to be automatically approved. So let's say lunch for 20, dinner for $40, and then a hotel entry for 45. Okay, so we're going to be submitting this. There shouldn't be any task popping up, which is nice. We're going to come to the tracking. We're going to be looking for completed instances, and then we're going to see that for this one in specific, it went through the upper pass, where the validation it recognized everything as in compliance, and it went through without the manual intervention. We can quickly iterate on the DMN decision service and provide much more agility on the process layer. And with that, I'm wrapping up.